It's bigger, better, expanded Productivity Awareness Week 2022 under the theme Expanding National Consciousness Towards Greater Productivity.
A pleasant good afternoon to all of you here and for viewers online. My name is Fabian Felix. I'm a civil engineer within the NIP, within the Department of Finance. And today, I'll be leading a panel discussion on the blue economy of St. Lucia, titled Threats and Opportunities of the Blue Economy for St. Lucia. And our panelists today range from various stakeholders or decision makers involved in managing the blue economy for St. Lucia. To my immediate left, we have Mrs. Sarita Williams-Peter, Chief Fisheries Officer within the Ministry of Fisheries, Agriculture, Food Security, and Rural Development. To her left, we have Samantha Charles. She's a Tourism Officer within the Ministry of Tourism. Sorry, let me get my acronyms right. Help me out. Ministry of Tourism, Investment, Culture, Creative Industries, and Information. Thank you very much. And to my immediate right, we have Mr. Loriana Celeste Forrest, who is the Acting General Manager of St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority. So our topic today is the blue economy. So just to give some stats on the blue economy, what is the blue economy? According to the World Bank, the blue economy is the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs, while preserving the health of ocean ecosystems. Other definitions include an economy that comprises a range of activities and related policies that together determine whether the use of ocean resources is sustainable. So our discussion will touch on the blue economy and the importance of the blue economy for St. Lucia as a nation. And as some of you may know, there is a drive to be more involved in managing our ocean resources. So just to give a background, so our panelists today would give a 5 to 10 minute speech or an informative session on the blue economy related to their sector. And then we'll have a question and answer session for you watching online and for those in the audience right now. The purpose of this panel discussion is really to engage you to ensure that information coming out of the Blue Economy initiatives by the government of St. Lucia is well received. It's an interactive session. I do expect a back and forth questioning, so please feel free to write your questions and your notes and ask them when the time comes around. So we'll start with Ms. Samantha Charles. Samantha Charles is a tourism officer attached to the product development unit of the Ministry of Tourism, and she's been doing this for the past 13 years. Her primary responsibilities are maritime tourism and tourism education and awareness. Ms. Charles currently serves on the board of directors of the SMMA, Supreme Marine Management Authority, working alongside stakeholders in the maritime sector to ensure sustainable use of St. Lucia's marine space and address areas of concern which affect the tourism product. She also served as chairperson of the Watercraft Advisory Committee. Samantha also integrally involved within the Ministry of Tourism's recovery effort for COVID-19 in the resumption of tourism-related activities, especially the cruise sector, where she's been involved. Her work in relation to cruise tourism continues as she spearheads the ministry's preparation for the much-anticipated 2023 cruise season. Next to me, we have Mrs. Sarita Williams-Peter, who is the Chief Fisheries Officer within the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security, and Rural Development, where she administers, manages, and provides leadership and direction on a wide range of fisheries programs and projects that provide assistance to fishing communities and support sustainable development and management of fisheries resources, both at a national and a regional level. With a background in biology and marine management, she has 16 years' experience in fisheries governance and applying interdisciplinary approaches towards coastal and fisheries conservation and management. Mrs. Peter Williams-Peters is passionate about enhancing the overall management and development of fisheries value chains and building capacities to strengthen the overall performance of the fisheries sector. To my immediate right, we have Mr. Laureanus Lesforis. He's a St. Lucia national with over 40 years' experience in the field of environmental management and solid waste management. He has been employed within the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority for over 20 years, having started there when the authority was at its infancy. He has worked regionally in the Cayman Islands for 10 years in the area of public and environmental health management prior to joining the authority. As you could imagine, Mr. Lesforis' role is vital, either directly or indirectly, to the sustainable management of our island, land, sea, and air. Ladies and gentlemen, these are our panelists. So we'll start briefly with Ms. Samantha Charles, who will give a rundown of her sector and how the blue economy is impacted or how there are opportunities within the blue economy for the tourism sector. Ms. Charles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Felix. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists and persons joining us live and also in person. So as Mr. Felix mentioned, I will just give a brief overview as to the ministry's role in relation to the blue economy, an area which you agree has immense potential for touristic and national development. So just some background information. The general mandate of the Ministry of Tourism is to ensure sustainable and responsible tourism for the visitor experience and also to ensure increased economic benefits for locals. As it pertains to our role in terms of efficiently utilizing our natural resources in a sustainable manner, while the ministry does not have the mandate for oversight and manage of our marine space, we play a very important advocacy role in ensuring that agencies fulfill their respective mandates in the sustainable management of resources. Throughout our various initiatives, we strengthen, where possible, our dialogue with the various stakeholders responsible for the marine space to ensure that whatever it is that the ministry is undertaken, it is done within the ambit of those agencies, ensuring that everything goes according to various policies and regulations. The threats as it pertains to the blue economy, while we understand the opportunities within the blue economy, with everything there is an upside and a downside for that. So as it pertains to the threats, we have had an ongoing issue of user conflict, which I think is something that needs addressing and brings to fore why blue economy initiatives must be handled or done in a very sustainable manner. Within the marine space, you have local use of recreational beaches. You also have visitors who, a large portion of whom come to St. Lucia for that sun, sea, and sand that we boast of and we market so frequently. So that, in addition to our boat operators who frequent the marine space, whether the guests disembark for that beach experience or they have their boats tied up on moorings, etc. All of which adds to the use of particular areas within the marine environment. You have divers and excursionists. Diving is a very important component of the tourism product. We recently received the award for the first time as adventure destination for the Caribbean, something we're all proud of, and by extension the dive product falls within that category. So you have persons who come to St. Lucia to dive, experience that underwater life, which is breathtaking, and that in itself adds to some extent the user conflict, where we want to ensure that the marine space is utilized and we capitalize on the opportunities for tourism, but at the same time we need to be mindful of the users of that space and how that important maritime environment can be utilized sustainably. We also have threats posed by climate change, which is another area agencies or stakeholders need to look at in terms of advocacy and addressing that particular point. Another issue is pollution. I think we all understand how important water quality is, not just to visitors but locals alike. Polluting our seas and our rivers, it affects the quality of the experience that we can boast of proudly within the blue economy. Moving on to the opportunities that lie within the blue economy, one of the things I've noted is to increase coastal resilience. How do we ensure that community residents, they bounce back after natural disasters, hurricanes, storms, flooding, etc., not just bounce back, but bounce back in a timely manner to resume their quality of life. So this is where coastal resilience comes in. Identify innovative and cutting-edge marine experience for visitors. I would like to applaud the presence of our boat operators, those that are licensed and certified to offer those tours, but notwithstanding, we do need to look at how we can increase the level of innovation in expanding the product offering for visitors in that area. And thirdly, ensure balance between social equity, whereby we have equal opportunities afforded to all, and environment sustainability. That balance is critical to ensure that everything happens hand in hand. In terms of proposed blue economy initiatives that can increase national productivity, recently we received a call for action in terms of identifying ideas to alleviate food insecurity. So this is an area where we can zone in. One of the things I've noted is sustainable fishing, and my panel colleague will expand on that. Notwithstanding, we also need to identify strengthening the marriage between tourism and agriculture. We have what you call farm to table, which is something that is very popular in terms of that experience for visitors, where they can immerse themselves in community culture and eat locally. Why not consider a sea to shore initiative, whereby we utilize the food supply within the marine space sustainably to develop linkages with agriculture and tourism? And finally, increase the focus on marine preservations, marine protected areas. This is something that is very critical. How do we identify our MPAs and put the necessary policies together to ensure their preservation and restoration, coral restoration, and that is a very important point as it affects the dive experience within St. Lucia, all of which ensures sustainable use of the marine space for divers and other users of the blue economy. So in a nutshell, these are my responses to how the blue economy poses a threat and what are some of the opportunities that we can identify for reaping the benefits to be derived from that big topic we've had so many times. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you, Samantha, on that. And you mentioned several points there, and we'll get to you in just a few minutes. You made some very important and revealing initiatives that I think the audience members would want to know about or be educated about. Considering the blue economy is an emerging topic on all fronts, all across the world. It's emerging as a new topic or a new agenda. So we'll move on to our next panelists. And of course, when you talk about blue economy, the topic of illegal fishing, it always comes up. What are we doing? There's coral mining taking place. We have to talk about sustainable fisheries. So I'll pass on the mic, or she has a mic, Sarita, Chief Fisheries Officer, will give us a little view of the Fisheries Department and the threats and opportunities that she knows about.
Thank you so much, Fabian, for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I think this is the first activity after the launch for National Productivity Week Awareness, and I think the topic of blue economy for national productivity is a very fitting one. Thanks to all the participants, both live in person and live on stream watching today. I'm hoping that the information shared will be beneficial to the development of the marine sector or the blue economy in St. Lucia. Just to highlight in terms of my agency's mandate, so the Department of Fisheries falls under the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security and Rural Development. And very keen for us is ensuring that we manage our wild capture marine resources and our aquaculture resources effectively so that we can reap national development for all of our St. Lucia nationals, as well as reduce poverty and, of course, contribute to food security, because these are very keen for the ministry's mandate, and supporting it is the fisheries sector. So what we pride ourselves on as a Department of Fisheries is that we recognize as a government agency we can't do it alone. It involves participatory management and something we refer to as co-management. So we try to work collaboratively with our stakeholders, both our stakeholders who are extracting, our fish farmers, as well as our tourism sector stakeholders, because Samantha and I think have some cross-fertilization in terms of stakeholders. And so we try to support all of them in empowering them to support that national initiative. With regard to the Fisheries Department, just to note that we've recently gotten our fisheries policy endorsed by Cabinet, and that's a 10-year fisheries policy which focuses on at least 7 priority areas. And keen to that is value chain development. I think that is one of the main areas where we can promote in terms of blue economy. One of the major things that I think is important to note, particularly for fisheries, is that wild capture marine resources are on the decline. We know that from a regional level and from a global level that there is concern about wild capture resources. And of course, it's resulting from not only the issue of overfishing. I know a lot of people like to think of it as only the fishers are contributing to this issue, but we all are in some way, because fisheries is one of those sectors that are impacted by everything that happens on land. And what we call the ridge to reef approach is really managing our land resources so there's less impact on our fisheries resources. And so as a department, we are working with all stakeholders to support that. So our mandate spans beyond just the waters, but we are involved in watershed management in some way, pesticide management, pollution management on land, and both in the ocean. So our mandate is very wide, and we're definitely realize that, you know, participatory approaches are important. In terms of some of the threats, I don't want to echo Samantha's inputs, but we recognize that there are both natural threats like climate change and man-made threats like pollution. These are major impacts to our fisheries resources. And if you just take a look at our coastline on a rainy day, you will understand the impact that it's having on our fisheries resources. There's this brown coastal, plume of sediment, and floating in the water quite a bit of solid waste, and I know my colleague from Solid Waste will be speaking about that. And these have major impacts on our ability to tap into the resources in the marine environment, because these are degrading our resources faster, or even causing a worse situation compounded with climate change and, of course, ability to extract from the wildlife. So in terms of opportunities, there are major opportunities, particularly as we look at aquaculture. The department has been able to support the expansion of our sea moss industry, support an export market, and this has been going very well. Right now, we're looking at various projects and initiatives to support our fishers involved in wild capture fisheries, and we'll speak about that a bit later, I'm sure. We're also looking at using things that we thought were threats in a positive way. For example, sargassum, we are partnering with quite a bit of development partners to support the use of sargassum as business opportunities. And of course, the department has been working on improving data capture and management, and that helps to support decision making for the future and see where we can expand, where we need to support increased management, but where we can also develop more business opportunities, because the mandate of the ministry is really poverty reduction and food security. So with that, I will close here and allow my other colleague to go.
Thank you, Sarita, on that very salient points made about the fishery sector. And several topics came up, and we'll get to that in a while, as you rightfully mentioned. The sea moss stock is always one that's heated and quite opportunistic, if I may say. Overfishing. We would love to hear the work that fisheries that they do in terms of managing fish landing sites, for example, and our coastal areas with regards to ensuring that it's sustainable, or the use of those areas are sustainable. In terms of the blue economy, there's quite a bit of stats that a lot of people probably are not aware of. Oceans are the largest carbon sink on the planet, meaning they help absorb carbon dioxide emissions from human activity. So it's an organ. It's pretty much the lungs, or it's an organ that cleanses the earth from a lot of airborne pollutants. In addition, an estimated 8 million tons of plastic waste and 1.5 million tons of microplastics enter the oceans every year. This threatens marine ecosystems, as Sarita rightfully said, and communities rely on the seas for their livelihoods. So with that in mind, I'll pass on the mic. Again, he has his mic, but Laureanus will give us a rundown of the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority and how they're managing waste and the opportunities and threats with regards to the blue economy. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Fabian. And let me start off by saying that most persons listening or in here today would have known or heard about the work of the authority, but you probably do not know about its mandate. We were established to manage, regulate, control, and treat waste either alone or in conjunction with the private sector. Okay, we establish, maintain, improve, and regulate the use of sanitary landfills and other facilities to manage waste. We were established to maintain transfer stations, meaning to transfer waste from one part of the country to another in the absence of a disposal facility where the waste is generated. We also have been established to manage facilities for the collection and treatment of hazardous waste that's generated within the island. We do not import any waste in St. Lucia, particularly, in fact, all kinds of waste. We were established to promote a resource recovery system. And when we talk about resource recovery, we know that waste, all items of waste can be a resource. So we were established to manage the waste instead of getting rid of a resource, using that resource for the benefit of St. Lucia. Also to promote and oversee public education related to solid waste management. I will just give a little of what we do. We are involved, of course, and most persons know that, in the collection of residential waste. We also collect waste from government institutions, for example, government buildings, schools, correctional facilities, office buildings, health centers, and what have you. We operate a landfill at Dayglow and a transfer station at Viewfort, which was previously a disposal site. We also have a program to manage waste oil generated by not only by residents, but also by garages and all facilities generating waste oil in St. Lucia. We also have a program for the safe disposal of used lead-acid batteries, and we're talking about batteries used in motor vehicles. We also have a program to ensure that healthcare waste generated at health centers and other healthcare institutions are managed properly. We also have a program to deal with the management of ship-generated waste. because we also receive waste from cruise ships visiting the island. As a signatory to the MAPOL Convention, which is a convention to prevent pollution from ships, we have an obligation to receive that waste, providing we can manage the waste in an environmentally sound manner. We also have a program to deal with end-of-life vehicles, what we most commonly call derelict vehicles along public roads. And last but not least, and that's just a few of the things that we do, of course, public education and awareness on issues related to waste management in St. Lucia. In terms of the problem we see for the marine environment and also the blue resources, the island's blue resources, the indiscriminate disposal of solid waste represents a major threat to the blue economy. The biggest component of solid waste that represents the biggest threat is that of plastics, particularly single-use plastics. In 2002, we did a characterization study of our municipal waste stream, and I'm talking about waste generated by households and also government institutions, and plastics made up about 15% of that waste stream. In 6 years later, in 2008, that percentage increased to 22%. And in 2018, while we did not do an island-wide survey, but we did a survey of the most populous district in St. Lucia, which is Grosley, and that the percentage of plastic increased, like I said, from 2008, 22% to 25% in 2018. So what that shows us is that the percentage of plastics in the waste stream continues to increase, and plastics mainly enter the environment, the marine environment, through littering, mainly through littering, indiscriminate littering, and also through indiscriminate disposal of waste by persons who do not care about the environment. Okay, now in order to address the program, there have been a number of actions undertaken, and government have enacted the Styrofoam and Plastic Food Service Containers Prohibition Bill in 2019, and that bill prohibited the manufacture, the importation, the sale, and the use of single-use plastics. And when we talk about single-use plastics, we talk about spoons, cups, plates, knives, forks, and what have you made out of plastics. Government have also applied a 0% import duty on all biodegradable and compostable alternatives, okay, in order to enable trading and business to continue. There's also, Cabinet have agreed to duty-free concessions for vehicles and equipment used in waste management. And currently, there is a management of beverage containers bill, which is currently being discussed among stakeholders. And what that bill will do when it is enacted is to place a value on plastic bottles, be it water bottles, be it soft drink bottles, but it will place a value on those bottles so that persons would redeem it instead of just disposing of it in the environment. In terms of private sector action to address the problem, we're looking at Massey Supermarket. They have introduced, of course we all know, Massey introduced a ban on single-use plastic shopping bags. While it was not an entire ban because they still sell the plastic bags to customers who want to use it, but they have been able to avoid millions of plastic bags being deposited at our landfills. With regards to the Wynwood and Leeward breweries, of course, they provided a facility for a recycler to recycle not only the plastics that they generate, but also plastics that is collected by that private individual. They've also introduced quite recently, and many of you may have heard of it, that they no longer would bottle Sprite in the green bottles that Sprite comes in, but in the clear bottles, because clear bottles are much easier to recycle than any colored bottle, be it red, green, blue, or black. Okay, we also have the Chemical Manufacturing Company, which manufactures industrial and household cleaners, and they have a return system for the bottles that the containers that they generate. So the public could bring it in and they could get a refund on the future purchases of their products. Then we have the hospitality and hotel sector that introduced a ban on single-use plastics. I think in all hotels in the island, no longer do they use single-use plastics in cups, plates, spoons, knives, whatever. They use alternative containers at their facility. And of course, we have the recyclers, very important sector in the waste management chain. They do the collection of plastics for export. Again, there's also international action for addressing that problem in St. Lucia. There's the World Bank Finance Project, which is unleashing the blue economy in the Eastern Caribbean. And that project seeks to strengthen the enabling environment for the blue economy and to enhance resilience of selected coastal infrastructure. And the World Bank is targeting three sectors: fisheries and agriculture, tourism, my two counterparts here, and also waste management. And Fabian may decide to touch on one of that project. Then there's also, again, international action, where United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, has provided funding for St. Lucia to undertake a marine litter management action plan. And the purpose of that is to reduce plastic waste leakage into the environment. Okay, that program will also strengthen collaboration and cooperation among national and international partners that have a stake in plastic waste management in St. Lucia. Okay, we also had, again, international cooperation with the Replast project, which was ended sometime last month. And most of you are aware of the Replast project. It was an incentivized scheme whereby persons would bring in their single-use plastics, PET bottles particularly, and they would get points for that, which would be redeemed for points at Marcy supermarkets and other merchants in St. Lucia. The private sector, of course, provided those incentives on behalf of that program. Then we have another international action undertaken by the government of Norway, which is a REMLIT program. Basically, it's the building resilience in the Eastern Caribbean through reduction of marine litter. And the objective of that project is to contribute to building resilience in the marine ecosystem through a reduction in marine plastics. Again, I said all those programs are geared towards reducing the impact of marine plastics onto the environment. And that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorianas, for that. Very informative, coming from the perspective of St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority. And you did touch upon several opportunities that St. Lucia could capitalize on. One question that always comes up is on the financing part, and you did mention the Unleashing the Blue Economy of the Eastern Caribbean project, the UBEC project, which is an ongoing initiative soon to be launched, that St. Lucia should be able to benefit from. And it simply means that we'll be able to get some funding to manage a lot of the issues that the panelists have brought on, have mentioned today. Things that affect the blue economy, from pollution to marine litter, from illegal fishing to initiatives that will improve how we better utilize our ocean resources. So stay tuned, you will get more information on that. So I'll start off with Mr. Lesforis or Lorianas. In terms of your sector, in terms of waste management, I gave some statistics in terms of ocean pollution. 8 million tons of plastic, get into our oceans every year. Based on your expert knowledge, and you mentioned the waste characterization, what do you think is the type of plastic or type of waste that get to our ocean most frequently, from your experience as a waste management expert?
Okay, the main types of waste that escape the waste management system is that of PET bottles, be it water bottles, and also soft drink bottles. And the reason for that is because I tend to believe persons really do not respect the environment, number one. Number two, there is not a system to what would I say, to provide an incentive for persons to return those bottles to the place of point of sale, or to a facility that would take those bottles back. Having said that, there are a lot of St. Lucians that are very conscious and they would not throw away their bottle for any reason indiscriminately, okay, either when walking or driving, but they would rather collect those bottles and make it available to a recycler. During the operation of the Replast project, a lot of persons, in fact, Replast project was a success in terms of enabling persons to bring their bottles to avoid that waste from going into the landfill. So to go back to your question directly, the single most important litter item in St. Lucia is that of plastic PET bottles.
Thank you for that, Laureanus. Just for you who's sitting in the audience, just please acknowledge, raise your hands, and will gladly welcome any questions, comment, or concerns that you have for the panelists. I'll move on next to Samantha. And I know you have so we have some questions already. Just 1 second, just to reach out to Samantha before she gets too cold in the corner there, because she was the first who went. There's a saying, build back bluer, as it relates to the blue economy, looking at post-COVID and trying to recover from COVID. From your experience at tourism, is there any concern that, when things get back the way it was, or even better in terms of numbers, do you think it will have a negative effect, or it will threaten our blue economy as it stands?
Thank you very much, Fabian. I would say that our anticipation of increased numbers, what that would do is to strengthen the rationale for having that balance between the tourism product and the use of the marine space. And we are expecting numbers to increase. Our projections actually for stayover arrivals are very positive. We're looking at a 49% increase in arrivals from 2019 prior to, the height of COVID, so to speak. Our cruise numbers are also looking very positive, increased calls in terms of vessel calls and numbers of passengers. Our yachting arrivals, we're looking at very healthy figures also, at least a 95% increase from what obtained in 2019. But to get back to your question, the balance between providing the experience and the product for the visitors and how we utilize the resources within the marine space. This is what's important, because a large percentage of our product offering, it happens on the water. I mentioned the dayboat operators. They rely heavily on the stayover arrivals and cruise arrivals for business. And given the wide range of experiences or products on the water, you have scuba, you have snoober, you have parasailing, you have diving, deep sea fishing, etc. One can very well understand, the pressures that can place on the marine ecosystem. And while we do not want to witness or experience depletion of these resources, we still at the same time want to ensure that that particular component of our product offering remains sustainable, and not just visitors, but our locals as well partake in those excursions, so to speak. So I think the balance is what's important, looking at how we can promote our product, but how we can utilize the marine resources sustainably, whether it be advocacy for responsible practices by our boaters, persons engaged in these economical services, and even from the perspective of our visitors, what is the message that we are sending to them when they visit our island and partake in those recreational activities. So the balance is what's important, and it's for us as stakeholders to identify strengthening our resilience within the marine space, but while at the same time ensuring that our tourism product continues to grow, because this is what we heavily rely on for our economic survival.
Thank you. So build back bluer, but
Build Black
sustainably.
Blue. And if we go back to the theme for World Tourism Day 2022, rethinking tourism. So how do we
That's right.
rethink what we have done before? How do we augment that to ensure that there's continuity for our product? That's just a little plug-in.
Thank you for that. Well
Thank
taken,
you.
well received.
Thank you very much.
So we'll take a question from the audience. Just identify your name and agency, and then feel free to.
Good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Humphrey Regis, and I'm from the Department of Physical Planning and Urban Renewal, Architectural Section. Question to you, Mr. Les Flores. Considering, okay, is there a strategy to minimize the reduction, or rather to reduce the pollution that actually ends up in the ocean, considering that there are places where this is most prevalent? I mean, sometimes one might say it's targeting, whatever, but at the same time, let's look at the Castries Basin. There is more garbage that comes from the Castries River, from the Marshall community, than comes from this river that passes right from the San Souci community. Is there a particular emphasis that's going to be placed on targeting the areas that are most culpable? I know it's going to be, I know the social stuff, whatever, but at the same time, we know where the problem persists the most.
Well, okay, any strategy that seeks to address the issue of marine litter have to look at the principal sources of the leakage of plastics into the marine environment. And yes, we're aware that the Castries River contributes significantly to marine litter getting into the Castries Harbor, and of course beyond that also. So yes, the strategy have to entail addressing those sources of leakages into the environment. Yes.
And Castries is it's our cruise ship belt. It's the where our cruise ships birth. So it's extremely important that we look at the Castries Basin, for example. We have another question on this side.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Iget Mata, President of the St. Lucia Divers Association. My question to you, Mr. Les Flores, you mentioned earlier on that the Replast project was very successful. May I ask why it was discontinued, and if there are any plans to restart that project? Also, my other question was about bottles. I know we've placed a really strong emphasis on plastics, but is there any plan to recycle bottles as well, as it's kind of like the second item that we find mostly on our reefs and other sandy beaches around the island? And my last question to you, regarding the importation of garbage or waste, how does your organization deal with waste that comes in from the cruise ship? Because in my mind, I'm thinking it's kind of like a form of importation of waste or garbage.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting questions.
We have a triple threat there.
Beg your pardon?
Triple threat.
Triple
Three
threat.
questions.
Okay. I'll take your last question first. The authority, I indicated in my presentation that as a signatory to the MAPOL Convention, which is the convention to prevent the marine pollution from ships, we are obligated to receive ships from cruise, we receive garbage from cruise ships, providing we have the facilities to manage that waste in an environmentally sound manner. And we do have a facility, which is a Deglo sanitary landfill, where we manage that waste in an environmentally sound manner. So we do receive that waste. That waste from cruise ships, that's in St. Lucia, does not go into the marine environment. So it is properly managed when it's offloaded from the cruise ships. Okay, second question about the other bottles. I do not know what other bottles you're referring to apart from plastics. Could you indicate? The glass. Okay. Currently, we do not see the other bottles as being a threat to the marine environment, because once a bottle is deposited, it is basically inert. It doesn't, a glass bottle doesn't disintegrate. Probably takes about 5,000 years for a glass bottle to disintegrate. And it's basically an inert material. We know that Wynwood and Leeward Brewery have a program that's been running for ages, and they're working good. It's working good where you return the bottles, you redeem the bottles. In fact, if you don't want to buy drinks, then you could turn in your bottles and get paid for it. So that is good. Then there's the bottles from wines, beers that's imported in St. Lucia. There have not been recyclers that have the interest in collecting those bottles for shipment because of there's a little value in exporting those bottles to overseas markets, and most of the time those overseas markets don't exist. So that's why those bottles, they're either disposed at a landfill or disposed of, like you said, as a diver into the sea when people have a good time on their boat rides. Okay, the Replast project, why did it stop? Simply because Replast project relied on external funding, and that funding dried up. Funding was provided by the European government, well, the French government, and it was extended, and the OECS provided some funding for that program to continue. But the model of Replast was not sustainable in the first place, because that model relied on volunteers working at the pop-up depots that was established to receive those bottles, and they were really not being paid. As the term volunteer means, you do your service for free out of your love for your country or your fellow man. So it was a volunteer program, and we saw persons, just losing interest at some point in time, not on a large scale, but at some point in time. Okay, again, it relied on merchants, for example, Massy stores or other merchants. I can't remember, but there were a number of merchants who provided, who provided services and products if you redeem your points with them. Now, a system like that would not continue indefinitely. So at one point in time, that program had to fail. What has happened right now? We have had a draft Returnable Containers Act. Now it's renamed the Management of Beverage Containers Bill, which is currently being worked on as I speak. The intent for this act is that bill, well, when it becomes an act, is to put a value on plastic bottles, just like there's a value on beer bottles, on malt bottles, right? So if you we believe that if you put a value on those bottles, then you would not see them in the environment, because persons would pick those bottles up and then go and redeem it for a value. Okay, that answers your question? I hope so. Thank you.
I just wanted to add as well, whilst most of us would see plastic waste when we do perhaps the underwater cleanups, etc., one type of waste that I think it's very critical to mention is liquid waste, sewage. That is one that we don't see, but is of major concern to our marine environment because it has long-lasting impacts. Many of our communities around the island do not have proper sewage disposal systems, whether it be at their homes or whether it be a community system. And a lot of sewage raw sewage ends up right in our coastal areas. And I think it's a discussion that we need to have. We need to start speaking about it more openly. And incidentally, the Ministry of Agriculture hosted a water quality awareness activity where we held in Soufrière. And we brought in a lot of our youth and school kids to that event. And we actually had a cross-fertilization of lots of different sectors, including environmental health, solid waste, forestry. All of these agencies were there. We had sort of an evaluation of the students' thoughts about what they had learned, what they got exposed to. And many of the students indicated that they were willing to do certain actions to help improve the work, not the work environment, but the environment. And that was very important to us because a lot of it starts with youth. Like, there's a certain age where people are thinking and they're just like, oh, well, you don't really care about the environment, but we have to start somewhere. And I think sort of the youth economy, the youth empowerment is very important. And I just want to note as well, my colleague spoke about MARPOL Convention, and we speak a lot about issues of ballast water as well, where vessels are releasing their ballast water, and what that comes with. So a lot of ballast water can actually bring invasive species from other parts of the world where there are no predators in this part of the world and cause major problems. And whilst the lionfish wasn't believed to be coming from ballast water, but still it's a major invasive species that is causing a lot of havoc on our coral reefs, and it is actually depleting our local reef resources. And that's an important conversation to have. We also have seagrass that's invasive and taking over areas that we probably had our natural seagrasses or our local seagrasses available. A point I also wanted to note about sewage is that it also is believed to be linked to quite a bit of coral reef diseases. Because there's bacteria in sewage and viruses in sewage, is believed to actually affect our coral reefs in a very negative way. And when there's disease on coral, it's very challenging. It's not like when, as a human being, you can go to the doctor and get antibiotics. It's very challenging to deal with issues in a marine environment where it's related to disease or bacterial or pathogens, etc. So I think it's important for us to recognize that a lot of people don't go under the water and recognize that there's a lot of marine life there, and a lot of what we depend on, like our seafood and our fish that we enjoy, they're very dependent on a healthy marine environment. And what we do in our homes and how we're releasing our waste, it's going to cause major impacts in the future. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that right now. Our reefs are not in a very healthy position. And it's not necessarily because of issues of overfishing. It's really, we believe it's dealing with issues of pollution, sewage pollution, especially, you have both from a rural development perspective, homes, our local homes, etc., but unfortunately from hotels as well. There's sewage being pumped through lines right into the marine environment. And so we have to rethink a lot about what we're not seeing and how are we going to treat it. Another issue just to bring up, even washing our clothes at home. The soap detergent that you use has phosphates in it, and that results in causing a lot of algal growth in the marine environment. So some of the simple things we don't think of actually has major impact on our marine environment. So you may see around some detergents saying phosphate free, etc. These are actually better for the environment, and we would want to promote that as well. So I just want to highlight that balance is very important, as Samantha mentioned, in terms of other industries and how it impacts future industries that are trying to also find a space to grow and develop. Thanks.
I have a question for Mr. Les Flores. I did not hear you mention it, but what is the process in terms of getting rid of like old tires from vehicles? You mentioned derelict vehicles, but when you have persons who they get rid of tires that are obviously of no use. Some use it in a manner that provides benefit, use it to plant, etc. Is there a particular process from solid waste management to get rid of like rubber tires and things of that nature?
Yes, Samantha, thank you for that question. We do not recommend burning tires. Okay, that's one thing we don't do. We recommend all tires for disposal be taken to the landfill at Dayglow, where we have a tire shredder, where we shred the tires into probably about 3 inch, between 3 to 4 inch diameter shreds, and we dispose of those shreds on the landfill. We do not bury whole tires at the landfill for 2 reasons. One reason is that they take up too much space at the landfill. And the other reason is that tires, because when you bury them, there is air trapped within the tires, and they eventually work their way up to the landfill, creating potential stability issues at the landfill. So persons could take the tires, like all other waste at the landfill. There is no charge if you bring in waste to be disposed of at the landfill. So this is what we recommend. Okay, and if you happen to store tires at your home, we recommend that you puncture the tires so that it do not contain water, because that's the number one breeding site for mosquitoes. So if you eliminate the breeding site, then you won't have to spend money on insecticide every night.
Just to add as well, we spoke a lot of the activities taking place on behalf of the government of St. Lucia to manage liquid waste, solid waste. One document that was, I guess, ratified by our Cabinet of Ministers is the National Oceans Policy. And what it does, it establishes a framework for integrated planning and management of our marine space and associated activities occurring within it for the period from 2020 to 2035. Just to complement policies like this, there needs to be more initiatives on ground to support all what we're talking about in terms of the solutions. The issue with liquid waste, castries, is a very vivid example of what we're dealing with. As you know, there's a ruptured sewage line 100 meters from us, and it's been pumping waste for almost, well, a little over 2 decades. And when we talk about investment opportunities, investors, sometimes they know of these things and they refuse to commit to invest in or gain foreign direct investment in St. Lucia for those same reasons. So it's a very complex and a very critical issue that we manage our waste properly. And this is just one vivid example of waste coming from our land. We have another question from Mr. Regis again, unless we have any other hands. Yes.
Yes, good afternoon once again. I have a question for each one of you panelists, to Ms. Charles, right? Ms. Charles, when we consider the diving industry, right, arguably all diving is located between Groseley in the northwest and Soufrière in the southwest, right? Arguably. And is there any plan to actually bring diving to the East Coast? I mean, I know we would say the Atlantic side, the waters, but it could also assist in the lives and livelihoods of the people on that side of the island. Is there any plan to actually diversify the diving stock from the West Coast and take it onto the East Coast, which, you know, they are adventurous people? I mean, all the requisite guidelines would be followed. All the, I guess, the training would be adhered to. That's for you and Miss Peter, right? Or Miss Peter for you. Another question. Considering that I have spoken to many farmers, and in case you wonder, I'm from Denver, East Coast. We bring the most fish in St. Lucia, so I'm a bit familiar with that. I have spoken to many fishermen, and they said it's very difficult to bring in the trawlers. In other words, one thing they would say, like, if they want to get a small trawler, the wall is at the Fisheries Department, Ministry of Agriculture. They always say it's when they register, the red tape is so long, and you know, most of our fishermen, they are not the most literate of people, unfortunately, but that's changing now. Is there a plan to actually remove whatever red tape there is, or at least ease it, because at least you need to have some form of even myself, I would love to bring in a boat also, if it's not very onerous to go through that process. And to you, Mr. Les Flores, we have this issue. We talk about our rivers, right? And I have said in many on many occasions that the way we desilt our rivers is actually, and surprisingly, I've heard no environmentalists actually burst the ceiling against that. We are destroying. In fact, we have destroyed our rivers. It's like saying, it's like applying chemotherapy. You kill everything. Instead of doing spot desilting where the river is allowed to cleanse itself, we have lost our crayfish stock, our eels and everything. Is there a plan to actually, which, and then again, this could assist the overall marine environment, is there a plan to change the way we desilt? And also desilting right now is a rabbit hole of cash because you can't quantify what's in there. And another question is this. We are also chemicals. Now, I happen to be a registered, certified practicing farmer myself. I know we talk about chemicals leaching into the waters, right? That's true. But sometimes you got to use chemicals. And unfortunately, some of those chemicals are either systemic, as it relates to touchdown, or their contact as relates to gramoxone. Now, I'm from at Bordley. And at Bordley, when it rains, it's like fertilizer to the ground. And when you work with a full-time job like me, you can't be on the farm every day controlling the weeds, so you have to use that. I know there's talk about using weed eaters and stuff, but a Saturday session, even if you have foremen, can't do that. Is there a way? Is there something in place to assist even full-time farmers? Because some of those guys, that's what they depend on. They try to go organic, but it's very expensive, right? And another one, I know I'm overloading you guys a bit, but I guess it's okay. Mr. Lesforis again, solid waste. I know right now the Ministry of Department of Health is actually, they actually give people those free chamber systems to build the soakaways, right? Sorry, the septic tanks. But then therein lies the problem. No one inspects the construction of those tanks, right? No one inspects it. I mean, the department I work at, we design them to scale. We do the requisite things that needs to be done. But then that soakaway is sometimes badly built. I have seen soakaways where there's just a sludge, because one has a concept: you dig a hole in the ground, you put some stones, you put your pipe in it, you put some polythene over it, you put soil. Okay, but the soil on the side actually liquefies. Again, you have a lot of. So is there some drive to actually assist folks in doing that? Maybe even to the point of using UV or chlorination to treat that effluent that comes from the soakaway. So I now have asked a few. So that's just a few of what I have, though.
Okay, I don't even know where to start. Quite a number of questions from Mr. Regis here. Ladies first. I think he mentioned the opportunity for the East Coast and diving. I don't know if you want to comment on that as well. It's up to you. But yes, maybe you can touch on that.
Thank you, sir, for your question. It's actually a timely question. What I can say is that under the UBEC project, one of the initiatives for tourism is the implementation of an underwater dive park between Ancillary and Marigot. So in looking at feasible projects under UBEC, it was determined that we have quite a number of dive sites and reefs for visitors to enjoy. But in an effort to reduce the pressure on those existing dive sites, this is one of the proposals put forward under tourism with regard to the UBEC project. That is still in its implementation phase, so I will not give too much information on that. But in answer to your question, for additional opportunities for diving, quite apart from the existing dive sites in the existing locations, this is an activity that has been put forward, an initiative, sorry. What that will do is also allow for capacity building opportunities for young persons to generate more interest in the dive sector, and also looking at providing, where applicable, technical training in proper navigation of vessels, etc. So to answer your question, this is an initiative that the ministry has noted and is looking at closely to reach fruition at some point. Okay.
Thank you. And that's a very good question concerning the dive sites, because often at times, from looking at a national development perspective, when we find services are concentrated in one region, it stresses a lot of different infrastructure sectors. So transport is one, for example. When all the cruise ships are here and all buses, party buses, they head to Rodney Bay, it adds to the traffic, the mess and etc. So it's always for a country to diversify and to spread out services.
Yes,
so
and also to ensure that there's more the decentralization of the tourism benefits. So as opposed to one particular community or area, harnessing all of the benefits all of the time, ensure that, other communities to have an opportunity to benefit from the tourism spend on island.
Ms. Martha, you had a point to make about the diving? Okay.
I just wanted to add to Samantha's intervention on the question on the diving as well. Just from the perspective of Department of Fisheries, part of our mandate is to license individuals who want to operate a diving facility as well as snorkeling facility. Part of the licensing process is to ensure that we have individuals who are competent divers and that we regulate the number of people, tourists or visitors, per dive master. And part of this perspective or part of this process is to ensure that people visiting our reefs are being guided by local knowledge, a competent person, because individuals in the water who may not be as comfortable diving or snorkeling or swimming, they contribute to a lot of physical damage of our reefs with their fins, etc. So we work collaboratively with our licensed dive operators to ensure that, because at the end of the day, they have a big stake in the process as well. And so we work along with them to build that level of trust that they will ensure that whoever is coming onto the reefs are operating safely as well as protecting the marine environment in what they're doing. So SUFRE, we know, because we collect the dive statistics, we ask every year when we do the licensing process for the dive operators, snorkel operators to provide a number of snorkels, number of dives at various sites around the island. And we know that SUFRE is one of the areas that are major for snorkeling and diving. And Samantha mentioned earlier in her presentation that conflict is one of the major issues. And we see that with SUFRE quite a bit in terms of the number of snorkelers. Dive, not so much, but more the snorkeling is becoming, a major area of concern to us because of the number of snorkelers. And we have reports of individuals operating illegal snorkeling operations. And so they have snorkelers in the water, people new to St. Lucia, new to even swimming, coming in, snorkeling around. It's like a chaos sometimes with the number of individuals. And of course, damage to reefs happen. So we know the West Coast is heavily used. There are a few dive operators which would operate like from something like SUFRE, do some special dives. Again, it depends on the competency or dive training level of the individuals they're taking out and where they would go. We know the East Coast is generally more, it's rougher waters, can be, a less comfortable dive. But I do know of a few operators that would utilize a few special sports, I would say, on that side of the island. Well, exactly. So they because of their training and competency, they would look at the weather, the tides, etc., and decide whether it's safe or not. Because part of diving is being safe. Like, you have to keep people safe first and foremost. As well, I wanted to note that under the Southeast Coast Project, which is being led by the Department of Sustainable Development, but the Department of Fisheries is also part of the implementation of the marine component. There is an upcoming, they're doing an assessment of the marine environment, particularly in the Mico area. I think Labrie as well. I think the project site spans there. And one of the things is that they're going to be doing training of people in the community to do diving, etc. And again, this is all part of an initiative to support community people who would like to get into this field of training, and they could be, supported by more employment in dive operations as well. So not looking at only people from a particular community, but bringing it to other members of the community. We also recently concluded a training in vocational education where we provided training to individuals in coral reef restoration. And again, all of these initiatives are part of developing opportunities for community people and individuals to enhance the reef through coral enhancement or restoration initiatives. But again, the mandate of the department is really to recognize that as a government agency alone, you can't do it. So we try to empower other community groups, civil society, to be able to do this type of work on their own and support them. So I would say probably last year or more recently, the Dive Association received grant funding from the St. Lucia National Conservation Fund to sink vessels again in the northern side of St. Lucia to support alternative dive areas. So again, all of these are very critical for us in terms of increasing dive sites, reducing use of reef, and again, empowering our dive association, our dive operators, civil society, CBOs to be able to do this type of work, because the reach will be definitely expanded. And when you partner with agencies, you can do so much more than when you do it alone. And so it takes two hands to clap, and we try to encourage this type of partnership. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe, Sarita, while you're here, maybe you could touch on the trawlers part. I think that was the next question.
Yes.
Why? Or
Fishing boats in general. Okay.
Thanks.
So in terms of fishing boats in general, actually the government, well, there is under the customs legislation, there is duty-free on all fishing vessels. And once you're a licensed fisher, you do get that opportunity. You bring in your customs declaration to the Department of Fisheries once you're a registered fisher and up to date with any previous vessels in terms of licensing. You do qualify for concessions, and that process is normally done quite quickly. The challenge is, of course, not a challenge, but the vessel must be inspected to make sure that it's seaworthy and that it's indeed a fishing vessel or a vessel that is suitable for fishing, or be categorized as a fishing vessel. So maybe that's the red tape that you speak of, but it's a necessary process to ensure safety of our fishers, as well as reduced damage to our marine environment. Because you can imagine a vessel that is not seaworthy going out there can cause a lot of problems in terms of running aground, sinking, etc. And that's more issues in terms of the marine environment. So there is an inspection process, and once that the vessel is suitable, we sign off on the customs declaration and they go through the process of clearing. There's also the Agriculture and Incentives Act that provides concessions to fishers as well, and there's an application process, and that decision is taken by cabinet, but it provides another avenue for concessions for our fisher folk. So the fishers themselves receive quite a bit of concessions through that process. There's also VAT exemption for particular safety equipment, because we try to encourage a safe fishing environment. Our fishers, are critical in terms of food security, and so therefore being safe out there, fishing is not an easy job. It's very challenging, it's very dangerous, and so therefore we are working towards increasing safety. And I should probably mention as well, we have an initiative right now where Digicel is providing service to us to have vessel information systems that will provide information on location of fishing vessels. So if a fisher is in distress, we would actually be able to know the location of that vessel immediately and provide support through our Marine Police unit. So again, these are initiatives, and actually the vessel information system comes free of charge at this moment, but it is a cost to the government of St. Lucia, but it is free of charge to our fishers, again, to improve their livelihoods and safety and well-being. Thanks.
Thank you. Was there one more question?
Okay.
Okay, so I think the last part of his question was related to you. I can't remember, honestly.
Okay, Mr. Regis, unfortunately, I have bad news for you. Your question in relation to the silting of rivers does not fall under the purview of the Solid Waste Management Authority, neither the issue of the construction of septic tanks. That's an issue for the Department Environmental Health, Department, Ministry of Health. Thank you.
Perhaps I should also bring in, I know you mentioned about pesticides, and it does fall under the purview of my ministry to some extent. So I think perhaps I will take on the mantra to address that one as best as I can. So there is a pesticide board that provides guidance in terms of what can come into the country in terms of pesticides. And so they regulate what pesticides are permitted or not permitted. And in addition, our agricultural extension officers provide guidance to farmers in terms of when they can use certain types of pesticides. So there's if I remember my colleague from who works with the pesticide or research department, there are particular pesticides that you would need to apply and allow for a certain period of time before you can harvest, as well as fertilizers, etc. So there is a process that would allow for the safest use of that pesticide. And so it is incumbent and very important that our farmers follow these guidelines. As I said before, it cannot be done alone. The government cannot be there at every farm, every minute of every day. We must take some personal responsibility for what we do. We have the information, we provided with the information, we now must do something with it in a positive way, because if we want to build a St. Lucia that is for the youth and for improving our national development, it starts with each and every one of us. And one of the things that I try to advocate quite a bit on is that it will take a lot of leadership, not only at the highest level, but leadership throughout St. Lucia, both at the civil society level, the government level. It will take a lot of leadership, because what we're leading is change. What we're leading is a change of mindsets, a change of culture, a change of what we normally used to do. And so it's very important that we see ourselves as leaders and that we try to lead the change within ourselves. Thanks.
Thank you for that contribution. Samantha, did you have a contribution?
I actually, in my introduction earlier, I forgot a very critical component of the ministry's function as it pertains to the blue economy or the marine sector. So, Sarita actually jogged my memory. One of the things that the ministry is responsible for is the processing of incentives for marine operators, so our local water-based operators like our divers, etc. Currently, we have an existing cabinet conclusion which allows for a waiver of import duties on vessels. However, I will just mention that we are in the process of transitioning to an overarching developmental policy for tourism, i.e. the Tourism Development Act, proposed Tourism Development Act. And as we speak today, mark the start of consultations with different subsectors on the certification process. So all service providers, including local water-based operators, will be required to get certified, and that is to ensure conformity to industry standards and the provision of the highest quality service to visitors. So thanks for reminding me of that, Sarita. We do process in-house incentives for marine, our local marine operators. And if any of our boaters are listening, I implore you to be part of the consultation for the proposed Tourism Development Act, where you will receive all the necessary information on certification, the process, and why it's important for you to get certified as a tourism service provider. So thank you.
Thank you. So there are many incentives for persons who want to capitalize on the opportunities alike with the blue economy with regards to tourism. I'll just read some excerpts there from an ideal scenario of a blue economy. And it says, it's inclusive and improves lives for all. Harnesses renewable energy where applicable. Uses smart shipping to lessen the impacts on the environment. Creates jobs, reduces poverty, and ends hunger. Conserves marine life. Protects coastal communities from the impacts of climate change. Just one question, and that's coming from me. Considering that when I go fishing, I'm always advised to stop by the supermarket first to buy some fish, because I never catch anything. The topic of overfishing, how is that managed? How is it reported? How is that managed from a legal point of view.
Okay, so first let me give a little explanation for overfishing, because I think it's important to classify or explain what overfishing really is and some of the things that negatively impact our fishers. So earlier I spoke about the impact of sewage on our marine environment. We spoke a lot about pollution. These impacts have affects the ecosystem that the fish depends on for its shelter, its food, etc. So what we call mortality of fish is increased because of pollution, sewage, all of these negative impacts. So now you're dealing with a situation where you have a smaller resource base. Now let's say the fisher 20 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago, we didn't have so much development on the coastlines, etc. So obviously the mortality of the fish because of pollution was much smaller. The fisher could have catch much more. But over time, because the mortality is increasing because of all of these other impacts, the fisher now, if he continues to catch the same amount he used to catch maybe 30 years ago, he will be contributing to overfishing. So therefore, as a department, our role and responsibility is to look at how much can we reasonably take from the marine environment without causing the crashing of the fishery, as we would say, or the depletion of the fishery, or the inability of the fishery to replenish itself. And so it's a very challenging process because we don't deal with a single species. For example, if you look at reef fisheries, we're dealing with multiple species. So it's very challenging to tell us to know with precision how much can you take from the sea without causing the issue of overfishing, particularly compounded with all the man-made impacts like pollution, compounded with physical damage to the reef, compounded with climate change. So the fishers I know are very concerned about, we only think of issues of overfishing, but forget that there are wider range impacts like sewage and pollution, etc. And so for us, a department in our legislation, we do have certain rules and regulations to help support or reduce the catch of, for example, juvenile fish. We would have regulations on the mesh sizes of the nets and pots, etc. So for example, if somebody is importing nets or fish wire to make pots, there is a certain size limit. Customs would normally detain the item unless it's inspected by a fisheries officer to ensure that it meets the legislation. And that is in a sense a way of controlling the amount of small fish that are caught. So that's one of them. We also have controls like the open and closed season. So for example, right now we have an open lobster fishery, but there's a period of time where we would close the fishery and not permit anyone to harvest or have in their possession lobsters. And that again is part of giving the fishery a rest, reducing the amount that is caught for the year, in addition to protecting the peak breeding period. So the time when the animals are reproducing, we want to protect that part of their life cycle. So it's a very complex science. It's not a perfect science. It can be very challenging because when you're dealing with ocean space, which is much larger, we have a much larger ocean space than our land space. There's a lot of information that you do not know. And so we also operate on what we call a precautionary approach. So sometimes we would implement measures that would allow us to be cautious without the information. So it might seem to our stakeholders as being, overly regulatory, but part of that process is because we do not have certain bits of information to make a decision, it's better to err on the side of caution versus to allow the fishery to be open and we do as we please, and then the fishery crashes and everyone is affected negatively. So that is one of the things that we would do. But we also try to balance all of this with traditional and cultural practices. We recognize that, you know, there are part of the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries is understanding that you would have a few fishers that have maintained traditional practices, and so we try to make a window or a space to allow for those traditional practices to continue as well. Thanks.
Very interesting that there are so many solutions to manage the fisheries industry, I guess to a science or to complement the evidence to protect the industry. Just another minor question related. So, for example, I know in the US, in many of the lakes, you have to have a license to fish. It doesn't matter who you are. to cast your line in that body of water, you must have a license. Has that ever caused any discussion within the Department of Fisheries to have everyone licensed or some form of registration for people going out there fishing? Because one day I might catch a whole trawler load of fish and you will not know about it because I'll take it home. And that to me...
Well, don't admit your guilt on live television.
One day.
But the department, there is in our legislation the requirement for individuals who are operating from a vessel to be licensed. It is a requirement by law that if you're going on a vessel out at sea to catch fish, you are required to be licensed with the department. For now, our legislation does not cover individuals who are doing shoreline fishing, rod and line, etc. Okay, so when you say vessel, we mean any craft that could be used on the water. Yes, so even if it's a little inflatable dinghy, it will be called a vessel. Yes, so you will need to get a license to operate. And we provide that license for both individuals who are doing recreational fishing as well as commercial fishing. Again, that helps us know our stakeholder base, and when there is new information, management plans that would restrict or regulations, because we have to be very proactive as fisheries practitioners. Because you're dealing with a resource that is an animal base or live, there are certain things that you may need to implement immediately through our management plans, etc. So things that maybe 10 years ago you didn't have an issue with and you didn't have to regulate, right now you may need to. And so we have to be responsive to the environment and the situation. So therefore, knowing our stakeholder base through the licensing process helps. And it also helps because we do inspections on the vessel to make sure that individuals are operating safely. It provides us with information, our stakeholders, so that when we're doing programs to promote individuals who are environmentally aware and conscious, and to share information on open close season, mesh size information, we know who these individuals are and we can share that information quite quickly. So it's important to do that. So our legislation is still very outdated. It's from our Act is from 1984 and our regulations are from 1994, 10 years after. That's pretty outdated. So therefore, right now it does not cover individuals who are shoreline, etc. But as we revise our legislation, particularly as we have gotten our fisheries policy approved, it may in the future look at ensuring that people are licensed so that we can provide that guidance directly to individuals. Thanks.
Okay. So being involved in the maritime industry for over 25 years, the issue of water quality has come up over and over, time and time again, especially as it relates to grey water, water from the hotels entering the sea and that kind of thing. Is there any legislation in place to guard against such? And if there is, who is responsible for enforcing it? Because as we speak, and you rightly said earlier on, there are lots of strange phenomenon affecting us these days. We have the stony coral tissue loss disease. Of late, we had the dying of our diadema or the black sea urchins. We've had an increase in algae bloom and all those kinds of things. So what is being done, if any, what is being done as it relates to those areas, particularly as it relates to nutrient-rich water entering the ocean? We've had cases, or we've heard of cases where we had flesh-eating bacteria affecting people in certain bays, and these kinds of things usually just are brushed aside.
I can try.
Well, from a Department of Fisheries perspective, we also feel the pain of these situations because it impacts our marine resources, it impacts our fishers, it impacts our dive operators, and at the end of the day, as we're sort of the primary agency that is involved or have the expertise to do management of living marine resources, and so we see the impact. One of the things that we work on as a department is to raise awareness of the issue of water quality. We also serve as a referral agency on the Development Control Authority. So when there are plans for major developments, we would sit on that. We will be one of the agencies that receive the environmental impact assessment or to give advice on what should be included in the environmental impact assessment. And part of that, we look very closely at whether there are plans for solid waste or liquid waste management, what are the impacts of the development on the marine environment. And we do look at that and provide recommendations. I think the challenge is now following through, because then the environmental impact assessment would indicate what the developer intends to do or should be doing, but we need to improve our capacity to monitor and to regulate what's happening. So the department had established a water quality management program, a water quality monitoring program, to be correct, where we would collect data primarily from SUFRA, and that is why we had initiated the water quality awareness activities in keeping with the United Nations Water Quality Awareness Month in August and Water Quality Monitoring Day in September 18th. We started this initiative to raise awareness, because what we realize is that unless our people know or understand that there is a water quality issue, there will be less action. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness on how it impacts all of us, and to increase the capacity of agencies and the coordination of agencies, because many of us, all of us, are affected by water quality issues, from tourism to fisheries to sustainable development, environmental health, all of us. And all of us have a bit of a mandate when it comes to water quality. And so therefore, under the Ocean Governance Policy and Strategic Action Plan, there are some initiatives related to water quality. There is an Ocean Governance Committee that, again, has the agenda of water quality audit. We have lots of agencies working on this. There are challenges, particularly when you have major developers that contribute to national economy. But I think there are solutions. The department is working with Jeff through a small grants project to sort of focus it on, okay, how can agencies come together as a committee to help support actionable initiatives that will support improving water quality bit by bit. So we're developing a water quality monitoring program in conjunction with the SUFRA Marine Management Association that will help us know what the situation is. And of course, we've brought on board agriculture and many other agencies to say, okay, what are some of the things that we can do within our purview as technical officers to help support improved water quality? It's a big issue, but I think if we start picking at it little by little, we will get further than trying to take a big bite out of it in the long run. Thanks.
So just to add to this, the issue of water quality, it's environmental health, as Sarita rightfully said, and Loriana's also mentioned that the ones responsible for checking systems are in place to ensure grey water do not get to streams, rivers, and onto the sea. St. Lucia, under the Cartagena Convention, signed back in the days, sign off to really control land-based source of pollution, prevent it from getting to the sea, the marine environment. And what this defines, their standards of tests, or their different parameters for certain chemicals that your water body should probably not surpass to ensure that it's safe. So when you look at things like fecal coliform level, that's pretty much effluent from your septic tank. Oxygen, BOD, biological oxygen demands. There's so many different minerals, phosphorus, sulfur. There's certain minimum or maximum levels that your water body should have to consider it safe, or they call it classes. For example, class 1, class 2, class 3 waters. Class 1 would be water for tourism use, diving, snorkeling. Class 2, probably medium level. Class 3 is like industrial, like what Port Castries is right now. So different levels that those parameters are supposed to show. And it's interesting that Sarita is mentioning that there's something in place to monitor that at probably a unit or departmental level, because currently only CAFRA was doing those type of tests for St. Lucia. So it's good to show that there's some progress on that we could monitor it on our own to ensure that we meet those specific standards.
So just a clarification.
Yes.
What we're working on is the collection of, CAFA is actually the agency that
okay.
would do the biological and chemical assessments. What we would do is more like the physical parameters like turbidity, etc.
Oh, right.
But we would still have to take water samples and send it to CAFA to actually do the assessment. In the past, we had the partnership with Environmental Health to do it at the Grosley Polyclinic, where they would do the fecal coliforms and E. coli counts and let us know what the situation was. But since then, we've not been able to continue that partnership. So we're working with CAFA now to do that. Okay. But I think we can appreciate that when we go through CAFA, there is a cost associated with it. So that can be very inhibiting for agencies to continue the process. So that's why with the Jeff, under Jeff, we're looking at grant funding, but continuing the process. And I think that's the challenge, is continuing the monitoring so that we can actually report and say, it's getting better, it's getting worse, this is the point source, and this is how we need to continue working on it. So I think right now, that's why we have that committee established, or trying to establish this committee of dedicated individuals who would provide sort of practical, it's focused on soufre, but the intention is to provide practical solutions, maybe through the realities. We have to try to put project proposals together. So if there's a particular area we know that, okay, we need to focus on, let's say, a pig pen or something to that effect, then you focus some grant funding on that. You develop a project proposal to address that issue. And then you continue to monitor to see if the impact is being felt, and then you continue to knock off some of the things that are impacting and the issues that are impacting. The fact is, we have to balance development, livelihoods with the environment, because the reality is that if our environment is degrading, our livelihoods will be impacted negatively. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Regis again.
Yeah, that's my last set of questions, so it's okay. Okay, to Ms. Peters, right? Considering that a strength can also be a threat, and a weakness can also be an opportunity, is based on perspective, right? Is there any measure put in place to control the quality, the size of fish? It's like a banana farmer would never harvest a banana that is not properly or is below a particular size, they know it's going to be rejected. I mean, last week, I went to check a buddy of mine by the fish area, and I said, buddy, you guys should be in prison. All of those fish should be in the sea. Is there any inspection that is done that would the department undertake by those areas to discourage that kind of activity? Because taking everything is like applying, like I say, chemotherapy. Everything dies, good and bad. That the next season could be even like, we keep on going down the drain. That's one. And number two, is there a particular map that is provided that gives the extent of the pollution, let's say liquid waste or whatever pollution into the environment, like the water, based on the coast, let's say the East Coast. So at least someone may know, okay, up to this point, I might get this kind of pollution and beyond that. And also, for let's say, I heard fishermen talking about, like right now in the lobster season, and there's one common theme. They said that the corner of Mulashik Peninsula, maybe the most lobster-rich area in St. Lucia, maybe our good friend can, but no one goes there because they said there's an undertow that takes you to St. Vincent, right? No one goes there. Even the best divers don't there. But is there a map that would actually assist? Say, you know what, there is this current there, or there is a particular, or expect undertows at particular tides, or surface currents at particular tides, because this would better assist the fishermen in doing such. And to Mr. Lesflori, just one, if I could say, maybe I could say advice, comment, whatever. I know we have lots of ties, and shredding them at some point becomes unsustainable, because I thought the shredding was to export, but burying them is unsustainable. Could the Solid Waste Management Authority team up with the Department of Infrastructure for the construction of geowalls using tires? I mean, the French guys did one by the Lac Wamingo School. And let me tell you, it's properly done. I mean, it's not just built haphazardly. There are meshes in the soil to assist it. And if one actually uses it as a garden, no one would know that there are tires in there. So maybe the solid waste could look at teaming with infrastructure and the geotech officials out there, so we could start building some of those, what we call it, geosynthetic walls, actually, using those tires. So maybe we might have a lack of tires at some point. Yeah, thanks.
So here, question, and he touched upon productivity among fishermen and the Mulashik situation. So in keeping with the whole topic of productivity, how can fishermen probably capitalize on opportunities like this to be more productive? Not to overfish, but to be more productive in catching and ensuring we have better food security.
Okay, so in terms of productivity in fisheries can be a very complex topic. We understand that there are certain fishing grounds that may not be, or certain areas that may be productive for fisheries, that may not be accessible to fishers. And we've heard that in terms of, let's say, conch. There are certain areas that are important conch grounds, but the accessibility to these areas are restricted because either it's a very high shark infested area, or the currents are not suitable, or the depths are not suitable. But in the context of fisheries management, that's not always a negative thing. As you said, perspectives. With the advent of a lot of technology globally, like fish finders, larger fishing vessels, types of gear like purse seines, and what I would say, not trawlers, but trawling, like dragging nets on the sea bottom, we have realized that these forms of fishing are very destructive and has actually caused a major decline in our fishery resources around the world. And a lot of the industrial countries, the larger countries, developed countries, are the ones that have invested in these types of fishing gear and fishing vessels, which has resulted in rippling effects, particularly to our small island developing states. And so, whilst there are areas that you may want to encourage the fishers to use, in the same breath, I think natural phenomena help with ensuring an area is protected, so to speak, and is not accessible to fishers. So therefore, it naturally reduces the implications of overfishing. And one of the things we try to promote in fisheries management is what we call marine reserves, which are areas that are dedicated towards a no fishing, no extraction. Because what we realize, the science of it is that when you protect an area, allow no fishing, no extraction, it allows the resource to replenish itself, grow, produce younger ones. And what we find is that because there is now a limitation on space for all this amount of fish, they move out of those marine areas into other areas where fishers can extract it. And so marine reserves are believed to be very important, a very important tool in fisheries management, because it helps serve to increase the amount of fish available to fishers by giving areas a rest. So by virtue of the fact that they may be productive areas that are not accessible, it's almost like a marine reserve, a natural marine reserve, giving this area a rest so that it helps produce more lobsters to replenish other areas. So that's it. So in fisheries management, that concept of productivity is a slightly a different spin for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarita. Any more questions coming out of the audience or panelists?
I think you also mentioned the issue of size of fish. I just want to make sure we answer all the questions.
Yes, he saw his friend.
Yes.
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 In Castries, right next to fisheries. Right next to fisheries.
So one of the things we try to promote is a lot of the practices that we may be seeing is market driven. If the market does not want it, chances are the fisher will not bring it. And so if our palates are asking for buying the small fish or accepting the small fish, then the fisher continues to bring it. So it's very important when we do our work, we do a lot of consumer awareness. We try to, again, empower the consumers to ask for better, to be aware that there is an open and closed fishery, to be aware that there's a certain size limit for the lobsters. The carapace must be 9.5 centimeters and above, not lower. It shouldn't be carrying eggs. So when your consumer is saying, this is an undersized lobster, I don't want it. It's outside of the lobster fishery, I don't want it. This fish is too small, I don't want it. The fishers respond to the market. And so part of our work is a lot of consumer awareness. It's very challenging. We have 1,150 registered fishers. We have over about 300 licensed fishing vessels. And we have minimal staff. We have 35 staff, and those that are involved in extension maybe is even smaller. So the point being here is that we cannot be like police on the ground for every vessel that is landed. The extension officers do share information. We encourage the fishers. If we see certain things, we tell them to put it back. But not every time you see somebody. Our data collectors also do that. But the reality is that we need to clap our hands. We need to extend the reach by encouraging consumers to not purchase it. If you don't purchase it and you don't want it, chances are people are going to change, the fishers are going to change. And the reality is that we're getting a good bit. I mean, I must be honest here and say we're getting a good bit of compliance from many of our fishers. They are aware, like a lot of our older fishers are aware that if a lobster is too small, the thing didn't have a chance to reproduce, obviously in the future I'm going to be impacted. So a lot of them know that. I think sometimes we have fishers that are not fully vested in the sector, who are 1 day, 2 day fishers, go back to construction or farming, who are not, they don't see this as their forever livelihood. So there's less sensitivity or understanding that their impacts, their practices today will have major impacts for them later. So again, consumer awareness is one of the things that we do to help reduce these incidents.
I want to ask a question, Sarita. Do you think, in addition to market demand, do you think it's a case whereby the fishers, they know the size of the fish, but if I don't get a fish that's the requisite size, as opposed to not having a catch to sell, I prefer to take what I got from the sea, and with the hopes that it will sell, as opposed to letting it go, because looking at the economics of things, they want that sale. So do you think it's a case where they still chance selling the fish that are not the right size, in addition to the market-driven factors?
Yes, I think that we do have that situation, because quite a bit of our fishers are from communities that are, poverty-stricken. So there is that urge or requirement where, my livelihood is at stake, my ability to provide to my household. Sometimes they're the only income earner for the household. And so there's a large stake, a large risk for them, because there may not be other forms of employment, particularly when you have many of our fishers, based on our last census that we did, have another form of employment, be it construction or farming. But when these other forms of employment are not on the high, they go into fishing. And so it's very much a situation, as Samantha said, bringing in income to feed my family, to buy school books, because school is reopening, and it sometimes is on the breadline situations. And we understand that, and that is why we're trying to push what we call a value chain approach to fisheries management right now, which will allow the fisher an opportunity to gain more for whatever is landed, versus thinking that you have to land more to get the same value.
Right.
So we're trying to look at value-added opportunities, and part of that is looking at sanitary standards, improving the sanitary standards, the quality of the fish, so that we tap into sort of the tourism market right here. And so we try to promote as a ministry what we call Eat Fresh St. Lucia's Best. Again, trying to help our fishers, our farmers, our people consume local products as a means of helping our own people survive and be supported. And so, whilst yes, that is an issue, but we are working, and under the UBEC project, we're actually looking at measures that will help enhance our fisheries facilities to improve the standards by which fish is cleaned and processed, so that we can tap into the tourism market more and to support increased earnings.
Right. Thank you so much, Sarita. Now we're running out of time, so just a few seconds just to give your last comments, if you may, and then there'll be a lot more opportunity, a lot more conversation as the UBEC project unfolds. So stay tuned for that. Any last comments from panelists before we conclude? Mr. Les Forrest?
Yeah, very short. I just want to encourage St. Lucians to take responsibility for the waste they generate. This is our country. Okay, we need to take care of it. Do not indiscriminate dump waste. There is a place where waste has to be, and ensure that you put waste in its place, and waste ends up at a destination where it's supposed to be either recycled or final disposal at the landfills. So my plea to St. Lucians, let's take pride in our country. If we love St. Lucia, we'll take care of St. Lucia, just like we love our children, our family, and we take care of them. So let us love Helen, St. Lucia, our beloved land.
Thank you very much, Fabian. I'd like to thank the National Productivity Council again for the invitation today to be part of this important forum. I wish to reaffirm the importance of the blue economy, not just for tourism purposes, but in light of the theme, we could look at the blue economy on a national development front, and also to state the ministry's commitment in any initiative that leads to the advancement of our tourism product. Any area within the blue economy we can see as impacting the lives and livelihoods of our service providers positively, the ministry will definitely be part of such initiatives, and also to continue the commitment towards working with our stakeholders such as fisheries, SLASPA, SMMA, Marine Police, NC, etc., to ensure that whatever is undertaken is done in a sustainable manner and there is widespread involvement with our stakeholder partners. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay, so from my department perspective, I would like to take an opportunity to also to thank the National Productivity Council. I think forums like this help share or spread the message with regards to the importance of the blue economy. I think we have to recognize that our land space is just over 600 square kilometers, but our marine space is 16,000 square kilometers, and there are many benefits to be had. And I think one of the things is, let's not destroy our marine space or marine resources before we even have a chance to tap into it for greater benefits. So it's the action starts with us in terms of reducing pollution and helping our St. Lucia benefit more from these opportunities in the marine space. Thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council within the Department of Finance, I would like to thank you panelists, Ms. Samantha Charles, Mrs. Sarita Williams-Peter, and Mr. Loriana Celeste Forrest for joining us on the panel, making a wonderful contribution to our society. And to you audience members who are here, thank you so much. And those who are online, thank you for joining. Here ends our panel. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
It's bigger, better, expanded. Productivity Awareness Week 2022, October 17th to the 21st, under the theme Expanding National Consciousness Towards Greater Productivity. Productivity is simply increasing your output while maintaining your level of inputs. On October 17th, we launch Productivity Awareness Week, followed by a lively discussion on opportunities and threats in the blue economy. Bankers descend on the Vendors Arcade for digital banking solutions on October 18th. The Castries City Hall will be a buzz of activity on October 19th. Belty Bagay, a showcase from over 20 manufacturers displaying their products. But don't you miss the discussion on energy awareness, the reduction strategy on October 20th. And on the same day, we expand your consciousness with a timely discussion on the cannabis industry in St. Lucia. Productivity Awareness Week, October 17th to the 21st, 2022.